In the summer of 1942, Hitler's armies were unstoppable. City after city, nation after nation, all crushed beneath the weight of the swastika. When he looked east to Stalingrad, he saw only another name to burn into his map. He told his generals, "The Russians will collapse in winter." But the Russians did not collapse. The German army did. On the banks of the Volga, amid frost, starvation, and shattered pride, the mightiest force in the world began to bleed, and the tide of history turned red. Summer 1942. The unstoppable machine. The swastika flew over Paris, over Warsaw, over Athens and Oslo and Kiev. By the summer of 1942, the Third Reich stretched from the Atlantic to the gates of Moscow, a dark shadow consuming Europe whole. Hitler's Wehrmacht had become synonymous with invincibility, a word whispered in terror across a dozen languages. The Führer stood before his maps, tracing routes with a trembling finger, his eyes fixed on one city along the Volga River, Stalingrad. Not just another strategic objective. This was Stalin's city, bearing the Soviet leader's own name. To take it would be more than military victory. It would be symbolic annihilation. "Take Stalingrad," Hitler declared, "and the Soviet Union will break." His generals nodded. They had no reason to doubt. Had they not conquered France in 6 weeks? Had they not driven the British into the sea at Dunkirk? The machine had never failed. Lieutenant Friedrich's letters. Lieutenant Friedrich Weber adjusted his cap as his convoy rolled east through the Ukrainian steppe. The summer sun beat down on endless fields of wheat, golden and ripe. He wrote in his journal that evening, the leather binding warm against his palm. June 28, 1942. We are invincible. The men sing as we march. Moscow trembled before us, and now we turn south to finish what winter interrupted. My mother asks when I'll come home. I tell her, by Christmas, with stories of victory she'll tell her grandchildren. He was 24, an officer from Bavaria. He had studied philosophy before the war, Nietzsche, Hegel, Wagner. He believed in order, in discipline, in the natural superiority of the strong. The Wehrmacht was the instrument of history's will, he told himself, and he was its servant. Around campfires his men joked about the Russian cold. Someone mentioned Napoleon. They laughed. That was 1812, a different age, a different army. They had trucks, planes, tanks. They had modern warfare on their side. Winter, one soldier grinned, we'll be in Moscow before the first snow. Sergeant Yelena's vigil. 300 kilometers east, Sergeant Yelena Volkov pressed her back against the cold brick of a factory wall. Explosions rumbled in the distance. German bombers had been coming every night for a week, turning the sky orange and filling the air with ash. She was a medic, 26 years old, daughter of a schoolteacher from Voronezh. Before the war, she had wanted to study medicine in Leningrad. Now she wrapped bandages in the half-collapsed basement of Hospital 112 while shells whistled overhead. "We were told to hold the city or die in it," she wrote to her sister. "There is no in-between. Stalin himself has ordered it. Not one step back." Civilians dug trenches with their bare hands. Women hauled bricks. Children as young as 12 worked the factories, producing T-34 tanks even as German artillery found the range. The tractor factory kept its assembly lines running, under bombardment, workers welding steel while the walls shook and glass rained from broken skylights. Yelena treated burns, shrapnel wounds, frostbite from the previous winter. She saw fear in their eyes, but also something else, a stubborn animal refusal to break. These were people who had survived collectivization, who had endured the purges. They knew how to suffer. An old man shuffled past her aid station one evening, pulling a cart of rubble. His face was lined like ancient wood. He glanced at the western horizon, where German armor gathered in the fading light. "Winter always remembers," he muttered. Yelena didn't understand then. She would. The advance begins, August. The Germans struck like a hammer blow. Panzers rolled across the steppe, their treads crushing sunflowers and wheat. The Luftwaffe turned Stalingrad's wooden neighborhoods into infernos. Entire districts vanished in firestorms that could be seen from 50 kilometers away. Friedrich's division pushed into the city limits. The streets became a labyrinth of rubble and smoke. Buildings collapsed into skeletal frames. Factories burned day and night, their chimneys belching black clouds that blotted out the sun. "It's already over," Friedrich wrote on August 23. "We can see the Volga. Once we take the river, they'll have nowhere to retreat. The city will fall within days." His men moved through apartment blocks, clearing rooms one by one. Snipers picked them off from windows. Machine gun nests materialized in cellars. Every street corner was a potential ambush. The Soviets weren't retreating, they were dissolving into the city itself, becoming ghosts in the ruins. But the Germans kept pushing. They were still winning. They still believed. Yelena's hospital moved 3 times in 2 weeks, each time deeper into the city, closer to the Volga's edge. She treated soldiers who came straight from the fighting, uniforms soaked in blood and masonry dust. They told her the Germans were everywhere, that the city was falling building by building. "Keep fighting," she told them. "Just one more day." One more day became a week became a month. September turned to October. The first frost came early that year. The turning. Friedrich felt it before he understood it. The temperature dropped, not gradually, but like a door slamming shut. One morning he woke to find his breath visible in the air, his canteen frozen solid. The Soviets hadn't broken. Despite everything, despite the bombing, the encirclement, the endless German artillery, they held. Not just held, they fought back with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Every factory, every street, every pile of rubble became a fortress. The grain elevator, the Red October factory, Mamayev Kuragan. Names that meant nothing became places where men died by the hundreds for a single room, a single wall, a single meter of scorched earth. October 15th, Friedrich wrote, his handwriting shakier now. "We've taken 90% of the city, but the last 10% is killing us. Winter is coming. We need to finish this." He didn't write about the things he saw, the frozen bodies used as sandbags, the Soviet soldier who detonated a grenade with 5 Germans around him, the sniper who killed 17 men before they finally dug her out of a collapsed building, a woman barely 20 who smiled at them before she died. Something was wrong. The machine was grinding to a halt. And then, in November, the trap closed. Operation Uranus. The jaws shut. November 19, 1942. Yelena heard the thunder before dawn. Not German thunder this time. Soviet thunder. The ground shook as thousands of artillery pieces opened fire north and south of Stalingrad simultaneously. The sky lit up like a second sunrise. "They're counterattacking," someone whispered. Not counterattacking, encircling. Soviet forces punched through the Romanian and Italian armies, protecting the German flanks. Within 4 days, the ring closed. The hunters had become the hunted. 250,000 German soldiers found themselves trapped in a frozen city on the edge of Siberia. Friedrich's division received the news via radio. At first, no one believed it. Impossible. The Wehrmacht didn't get surrounded. They were the ones who did the surrounding. But the orders came down anyway. Hold position. Do not retreat. Reinforcements are coming. November 23, Friedrich wrote, "We're cut off. They tell us it's temporary. General Paulus says we'll be relieved within weeks. We have enough supplies for—" He stopped writing. He didn't have enough paper to lie to himself. Inside the cauldron. The cold came like a living thing. Not the crisp, clean cold of a Bavarian winter. This was different. This was Siberian cold, steppe cold, the kind of cold that found every gap in your uniform and crawled inside your bones. Minus 20 degrees Celsius, minus 30, minus 40. Friedrich's breath froze in his mustache. His eyelashes stuck together when he blinked. Men urinated where they stood, because leaving the shallow warmth of their positions meant frostbite within minutes. Food ran out first. The promised supply drops never came, or came in trickles, parachutes drifting down with crates of ammunition and propaganda pamphlets, but no bread, no meat, no fat to burn for warmth. They ate their horses, all of them, one by one, slaughtered and butchered with shaking hands. The meat was stringy and tough and gone within a week. Then they boiled leather, melted snow for water, scraped ice from the insides of abandoned buildings. December 8, Friedrich wrote, his handwriting almost illegible now. We melt snow for water. We burn furniture for heat. Yesterday, Wagner died, not from a bullet, from the cold. He just stopped moving. We couldn't bury him. The ground is frozen solid. We stacked him with the others. There were no more jokes about Napoleon. The radio still crackled with German propaganda, triumphant marches, reports of victories on other fronts, the Führer's voice promising that Stalingrad would be held, that sacrifice would bring glory. But in the frozen ruins, glory had a different name: typhus, dysentery, gangrene, frostbite that turned fingers black and brittle. Yelena's War. Yelena moved through the Soviet positions like a shadow. The city had become a necropolis, a place where the living and dead occupied the same space. She no longer flinched at the sound of artillery. She no longer cried when soldiers died under her hands. She had become efficient, clinical. She triaged with ruthless precision. This one will live, this one won't. This one might, if we're lucky. Morphine for the dying, bandages for the survivors. Nothing wasted. In January, Soviet forces began pushing deeper into the pocket, squeezing the Germans tighter. Yelena followed the advance, setting up aid stations in buildings the Germans had occupied days before. She found their diaries, their letters, photos of wives and children and dogs and houses that no longer existed, if they ever had. She found a Christmas card, hand-drawn, from a soldier to his mother. "I'll be home soon," it said. It was dated December 25, 1942. The soldier was already dead. One afternoon she entered a collapsed cellar where German wounded lay in rows. They weren't prisoners yet, just abandoned. Their own army had left them when they retreated to the next position. Too weak to walk, too frozen to survive. They looked up at her with hollow eyes, not hateful, not afraid, just empty. She gave them water. It was all she had. One of them whispered in broken Russian, "Thank you." She didn't respond. What was there to say? The mirror. Friedrich found the mirror in a bombed-out apartment on Mamayev Kurgan. It was cracked but still reflective, leaning against a wall covered in soot and blood. He looked at himself for the first time in weeks. The man staring back was unrecognizable. Sunken cheeks, eyes too large for his face, skin gray and peeling, beard matted with ice and filth. He looked like the photographs he'd seen of Soviet prisoners, the ones he had laughed at, the subhumans his commanders told him were lesser beings. We came as conquerors, he whispered to his reflection. We became ghosts. The city was a tomb. Everywhere he looked, frozen corpses. German, Soviet, civilian, impossible to tell anymore. They all looked the same under the snow. The wind howled through empty windows like the breathing of some vast, dying animal. Radio chatter grew more desperate. Paulus requested permission to break out. Hitler refused. Not one step back. Hold the city. Die there if you must. So they did. Friedrich's friend Müller shot himself on January 10th. Not from despair exactly, from pragmatism. He had gangrene in both feet and couldn't walk. He knew what was coming. "Tell my wife I was brave," he said. Friedrich lied. "You were." The bleeding. For the first time in the war, the monster bled. Not a wound of battle, but a wound of pride. The invincible Wehrmacht, the army that had conquered Europe, was starving to death in the ruins of a single city. Hitler ordered them to hold. Goebbels called them heroes. The newspapers published stories of their courage, their sacrifice, their unbreakable will. But in Stalingrad, will had frozen solid. Friedrich no longer wrote letters. He no longer thought about philosophy or history or destiny. He thought about warmth, about bread, about the feeling of his toes before they went numb. The Soviets tightened the noose, street by street, building by building, room by room. The end was coming. Everyone knew it. No one said it aloud. January 1943. The final days. General Friedrich Paulus sat in his headquarters, a cellar beneath the ruins of the Univermag department store. He was gaunt, haunted. His uniform hung loose on his frame. He drafted a message to Hitler requesting permission to surrender. The situation was hopeless. His men were dying not from combat, but from starvation and cold. Further resistance was pointless. Hitler's response came within hours. "You will stand fast or die there. Surrender is forbidden." Paulus stared at the telegram for a long time. Outside, his soldiers burned their regimental flags to stay warm. They had already burned everything else. On January 30, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal. The implication clear. No German field marshal had ever surrendered. It was an order disguised as an honor. Paulus understood. He was being commanded to die for symbolism. He chose to live instead. February 2nd, 1943. Silence. The shooting stopped. Yelena noticed it first, the absence of sound. For months, the city had roared with gunfire, explosions, the scream of Katyusha rockets. Now there was only wind. Soviet troops moved cautiously through the German positions. They found scarecrows in Wehrmacht uniforms frozen in place, some still standing, some sitting, some curled in fetal positions, hugging themselves against the cold that had killed them. The survivors stumbled out of cellars with their hands raised, skeletal, hollow-eyed, barely human. They could hardly walk. Many couldn't walk at all. Of 250,000 German soldiers trapped in Stalingrad, 91,000 were taken prisoner. The rest were gone, into snow, starvation, and history. Most of those prisoners would never see Germany again. Siberian camps waited. Only 5,000 would survive to return home. Yelena walked through the ruins as the sun set on February 2nd. The Volga was frozen solid, a white highway stretching to the horizon. The city was silent, except for the wind and the occasional crack of ice shifting on the river. She found a German diary half buried in snow near the Red October factory. The leather was frozen stiff. She opened it carefully. Lieutenant Friedrich Weber, Bavaria, philosophy student. She flipped through the pages. Summer entries full of confidence. Fall entries growing uncertain. Winter entries descending into madness and despair. The final entry, dated January 28. We were told we were gods, Übermenschen, the future of humanity. But gods don't freeze to death in cellars. Gods don't eat their horses and burn their flags. Tell them we were not gods. Tell them we were only men. And that was not enough. Yelena closed the diary. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the ruins, the shattered factories, the frozen river, the city that had been a city and was now a graveyard. In that frozen ruin, the war changed, the radio would announce later. Germany would never advance again. But Yelena already knew. She had watched it happen. The invincible had become mortal. The monster had bled. And the world, slowly, painfully, could begin to heal. History remembers Stalingrad as a battle, but it was something more, a reckoning. Every empire believes itself immortal until it meets the limits of flesh, ice, and time. The Roman legions learned it in the Teutoburg forest. Napoleon learned it on the road to Moscow. The Wehrmacht learned it on the banks of the Volga. Power collapses from within, not from the enemy's strength, but from hubris, the fatal belief that will alone can conquer nature, hunger, and the stubborn refusal of human beings to be broken. The German army died in Stalingrad, but arrogance dies in every winter since. The ruins are quiet now. The Volga flows again. The city rebuilt itself and changed its name to Volgograd. There is a memorial on Mamaya of Kurgan, a massive statue of Mother Russia with her sword raised, calling her children to defend the motherland. Tourists visit. School children learn the dates, the numbers. But beneath the surface lie the ghosts of those who believed the world could be conquered and those who proved it could not. Yelena survived the war. She became a doctor, as she'd always wanted. She never spoke about Stalingrad. When her grandchildren asked, she would only shake her head and look out the window toward the river. Friedrich's diary found its way to a museum in Moscow. His family never knew what happened to him. The Red Cross listed him as missing, presumed dead. He was 24 when winter came. He was right about one thing. His mother did tell stories to her grandchildren, but they weren't stories of victory. They were stories of absence, of a son who never came home, of a photograph on the mantel showing a young man in uniform, smiling, confident, invincible, until he wasn't. The snow falls on Volgograd every winter. It covers the monuments and the streets and the river. For a few months, the city turns white and silent, and the wind howls through the empty spaces where buildings once stood. And somewhere in that wind, if you listen carefully, you can still hear them. The conquerors who became ghosts. The empire that bled. The day the monster died.